Well, the book is amazing.
Oh,
I just want you to know that. It's amazing. Very much enjoyed it. Beautifully, beautifully written. Yeah, I'd love to chat with you about it.
Yeah, sure.
So first of all, how would you describe the book in a style of a newspaper headline?
Well, it was described in a newspaper headline. I wrote an article for the Daily Telegraph here, and they said, "Inside the mind of Killer King, a glimpse into the mind and soul of King Richard III, the king accused of killing his nephews." And I thought, well, you know, it was Killer King. That's all I saw. And I thought, it was extreme.
I feel like that's such a prevalent theme as well, isn't it, within the book? I was also not surprised because obviously I knew going into it. But I suppose I forget how much of a big part of his legacy that is.
It's almost the thing you associate with Richard, and I'm you know, Shakespeare's done a good job with it, is the representation of Richard is that he's a bad, evil killer, and the boys are inextricably entwined with who he is. I think that's what I wanted to show, that he couldn't get away from that. Even though he was dead.
Even though he was dead, it is his legacy that lives on. I think it's so interesting that things stick with you 500 years later, because I feel like that's what he's known for, isn't it? It was definitely very clear in Shakespeare's work, and even in history we're considering, I suppose, I wonder if it would have happened so much if the Tudor reign hadn't been so long, whether it would have been
interesting. I don't know. I think a lot of it was to do with Henry VII wanting to really take control and not be seen as a usurper, but have a rightful dynastic grasp of the throne, a way of being legitimate. And so Richard made it easy for people to not like him. Even though I'm sure when he was alive, this is what I think, is that he was quite a decent guy. He wasn't a frothing at the mouth serial killer. He was probably quite a quiet, decent northern guy whose brother happened to be the King of England, lived a very comfortable life, and was loyal up until the time he wasn't. And I think the sort of summer and the events of 1483, even though the Ricardians will argue that he legitimately believed that he had to step up and be the king. I think he had an intention from a very early stage after his brother died that he was going to try to assert his authority on the whole situation. So
yeah, I do think he's definitely someone who very much thought it was his rightful place, didn't he?
Oh, I think so. You know, from the word go, you know, he rides off to meet the prince. Right, arrest your uncle, arrest your brother. There's an intention there, I think, that he's going to take control, and it's not going to be the grasping, greedy Woodville family.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially, I think, considering the road he took to get there, there was no, oh, we'll just let things slide. It was very much, I know what I'm going to be, and I know who I am, and everyone is going to have to accept that.
Yeah, I think it was chaotic, but intentional as well.
Yes, absolutely. Obviously, a large inspiration for the book was the exhumation of the bones in the car park.
Yes.
Which is crazy in itself. But yeah, what in it sparked? Because I feel like the idea was developed so much further than that within the book. What was it that sparked the actual story, and how did it develop from when the bones were discovered?
That's such a good question. Like, how do you get that from a? So my mum sent me a photo of because it started in 2012. It was dug up, and so there were 3 years of Richard. You know, he dug up, DNA proved that it was him in 2013, and there was a facial reconstruction. It was quite gaspingly lifelike. Like, there he is. But the thing that really got me was my mum sent me a photo, and I haven't got it with me to show you. I'm sure you've seen it, of his whole skeleton laid out when it was cleaned and put together.
Mm.
And I felt so moved by it. I thought, wow, like that's really, really him. And you could see the curve of his spine, and it was that, you know, there was a vulnerability to it. So I being a poet, I wrote a poem called Talking to the Bones of Richard, and then being, you know, I wrote another poem, and then I was sort of chatting away, and then during that time I was working on the idea of dealers popped into my head, and I've always wanted to write from the point of view of a medieval person coming from a medieval time into the modern world. It really interested me, like how would somebody from the 15th century cope with the 21st century? What would seeing a train be like? Hearing the noise, the abundance of food, it would be chaotic and complex and difficult. So I had Richard, and I thought, well, he's a medieval man, and he could come into the world in some way. And I had Daedalus. So I put them together in the afterlife to start with. And for quite some time, my early drafts were just like a two-hander of Daedalus and Richard talking about what it was like in the afterlife. Not really very interesting for anyone except me. So everything. So I just sort of had different scenes coming into my mind as the story sort of grew. That's really what happened. I was talking to the bones of Richard, and then I visualized Daedalus, and I had to sort of put them together in some way.
Amazing. I love that. Was there any inspiration of Daedalus from the Greek myths?
Well, no, only his name. I can't really explain why this name popped into my head, but the inspiration came from when we were driving home one night. It was summer, and in Australia we have these huge bats called flying foxes, and a huge swarm of them came down over the car, and we had to slow down. And you know, they fly in really strange ways. They don't fly beautifully and smooth like birds. They've got kind of like little batty furry heads that come out on wings and erratic movements. And as I was watching all of this, it's a very dramatic scene, into my head popped the idea of a man dressed in a long dark coat, sprawled over a dining room table, knocking off the plates and the cutlery. And I thought, oh, right, yeah. And a book title popped into my head. And that was a book I was trying to write, but I didn't end up writing that book. I will. And that was how Daedalus, the first scene of Daedalus, the man who became Daedalus, that was the scene.
I love that. I love that. I think he was such a pivotal character throughout the whole book, and his story was so beautiful and so beautifully crafted, and you just felt so passionately for him and just wanted him to be very much okay.
Oh, that's so lovely, because I couldn't just start in the middle. With Daedalus, I had to go back, and I really had to know who he was. I had to know how he was born, when his mum died, what had happened to his dad, how he grew up with his snotty little cousins. And I wrote loads and loads of scenes of family life and Daedalus as a young man. And, you know, in the end, I started where I started because I was thinking, I need to know that, but maybe other people don't. But I think that really embedded him with a sense of a real character, like a person who was actually alive. Because whatever I'm doing has got to be real for me, even though I knew he was going to be an angel. It still had to be real. So
definitely. I think as well, especially there was the beautiful scene, wasn't there, where he reveals how he got given his name, and then what that meant to him and everything. And I thought that was such a small detail, but so intricate in its meaning and power for him and his like story as it progressed further. Yeah, I really like that.
Well, thank you. It's so hard to know when you've got, you know, this mountain of stuff in your head, and you just have to know what can you put in that gives a sketch and also a meaning, and not overload everybody. I think my early drafts, where I was so embedded with Daedalus as a young boy, going to, you know, I wrote scenes where his adopted mum took him to the abbey, and he was looking at the abbey door, and I wrote a lot about the abbey door because it was such a big door for a boy to see. But in the end, yeah, I think it helped him grow as an individual more.
Yeah, definitely. What was the research process like? was there any trips to Leicester, or?
It was long, and
Yeah.
it was very, very long, because research for me is like, once I start, I really can't stop. I didn't go to Leicester. I didn't go to Leicester because I kind of wanted to keep it, I don't know if this makes any sense, a bit of a mystery. There was, I knew so much about so many other things, or I thought I did. But I did live in York for 6 months, and I did find that enormously helpful. I was at the copy editing stage of the book, so it was written, but it added so much texture to my understanding of his journey. And I think the closer I got to the original sources, his signatures, his letters, spending time in the British Library, accessing all the wonderful manuscripts that you can get from there, and the Harleian MS 433, which is just such a brilliant piece of work. And also the calendar of the patent rolls. Even though they're bureaucratic, administrative details of warrants, grants, licenses, and all the people in favour with the king, people out of favour with the king, I found them really actually quite moving, because Edward IV's reign over, I'll have to sit with as well. You know, Edward IV reigned over 21 years, so they were just page and page and page and pages of it. But when you get to Edward V, it's poignant because there's only 9 pages, and then it's Richard, and there's no explanation. Oh, Edward wasn't feeling well today. Edward decided to stay at home. I knocked Edward's crown off his head. It's just Edward V and then Richard, and it's just so pragmatic and functional when you know what's actually happened around that. Like, why isn't Edward V continuing? So I could just keep on. I still am researching it, so can't seem to stop.
I feel like when you fall in love with something, it is so difficult to just put it down. You have to just keep going.
Yeah.
And what a beautiful place to do it. York is so gorgeous. And I feel like it really, especially certain parts of York, really put you back into that time period. And you can just picture everything. I imagine if I ever wanted to write a historical fiction book, I would very much go to York and spend a significant amount of time there.
York was brilliant, because I mean, I could go into the Minster, which is where Richard went on his way down south. I went into the Archbishop's palace. My foot went on the same step that Richard's foot went, you know, that. And going into the Nickelbar Gate and just feeling that sense of history around you. And they've got some great, the York Library, Club for York Library Explorer, has got some great council archives, the actual documents written after the minutes of council meetings in York when Richard had died. And you can actually, they treated the pages with some kind of covering so you don't damage them, but you're actually holding the real handwritten page with all of the names of the people who attended, and how they said how deeply affected they were by the death of Richard.
Wow. It's wild to me that things can be preserved that well and still be available for like public consumption.
I know.
I feel like I'd hold it and I'd just be terrified of getting anything on it. How cool. That's very cool.
You have to put it on a big plumpy cushion. The whole book goes on there, you know, one of those, it's like you put the book on the bed. But the pages are quite solid. I don't know what they treated them with. I asked them about it. I said, was that the original one? Because it felt weird. And they said, you know, you can look at it and leaf through it, and it's amazing that, you know, that little writing from 500 years ago.
That's so cool. How did you manage to balance historical accuracy within Richard's time and creative flair with the modern period? I feel like it was done pretty seamlessly.
Oh, thank you. Well, look, getting everything right, it was really important for me to get his life right, and I feel like that's what enables me to write fiction. It's getting me in this book, it's getting the basic foundations of what I'm talking about in historical detail right, because it's his life and he's lived it, and I can't it's not my job to alter Richard's life. It's my job to find the gaps that I can go into where I can write the fiction where it can work. So that's how I sort of do it. I take it really, really seriously, because I feel like I can't alter dates, but I could have him going to the Abbey at Oxenbridge, because nobody would really know whether he did or didn't, and it's possible that he could have done.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I did it. I really had to sort of struggle for, not struggle, but I strived to get everything right and in the right place, because it was a way of sort of honouring him. I think if you're writing about somebody who's a historical figure, you can't muck about with things too much. You can create a fiction around them and through them, but basic elements of their life have to stay in place.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what was really nice as well was that it kind of kept everything accountable in terms of his actions, but like you said, it didn't paint him as clear as a villain as he has been over the past 500 years. He was a man with troubles and lived his life and was very power, not hungry, I don't think, but was very sure of who he was and dealt with a lot of grief about what he did.
Do you think he dealt with a lot of grief? Yeah, I think he probably did. I think from how he took the crown, I think that immediately really made a lot of people not like him, because he's just, Edward IV's been on the throne for 21 years. He's got a son who's 12, who's going to be king. He comes into London surrounded by men, big fuss, big fanfare. There's his uncle, the protector, and it's just not a good look, is it? It just doesn't pass the pub test. Like, what's happened to the boy? You've got the crown on your head. Shouldn't it be on somebody else's head? It's just
you wouldn't get away with it nowadays at all, would you?
No, you wouldn't. No.
So with the killing of the princes in the Tower, I feel like it's such a contested piece of history. It was so interesting for it to be such like an integral part of the book. I feel like growing up here and stuff, you hear absolutely every which way. I mean, I'm in the Midlands, so we both very much have Tudors and the Yorkists.
You've got them all.
Got them all. It's really interesting to see such a solid standpoint. I don't really know what my question is, other than what have I got written down? Yeah, I'd love to hear your take on it. I think it's so interesting a topic, because obviously it's nobody was there. However, it's kind of skews towards one way, isn't it?
Well, I think everybody's probably got an opinion on what happened, and I decided quite early on what I believe was right. I had I don't know, from everything that I'd read, I determined this is how I'm going to go. Maybe I won't say exactly what it is so people can read it and find out at the end, but I think it's really also, there's such a huge interest in what happened to them, and with God bless Philippa Langley, she's done wonderful research, and she's put together new or old documents and archival evidence to suggest that both of them lived. I think it's very unlikely that Edward lived. I think that's just a real wish fantasy. I don't think he was the boy crowned in Dublin, or I don't think he went to the Battle of Stokefield. I just don't feel that sits right with me. I think it's much more romantic and probable that the younger one, Richard, survived in some way. But that's a whole other ball game of going down the Perkin Warbeck. Was he, wasn't he? Did he, didn't he? What's the evidence for that? And I think it's endlessly fascinating, because they were vulnerable and they were left. And England wants to know what happens. It's like they're missing children. And everybody wants to know where they were. And the fact that they were missing because a man became king and not one of them makes it even worse, really, somehow.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like it was so nice to read, because it was dropped throughout in a way that you really wanted to know, because it could have gone either way. And I'm not going to say anymore because I want people to read it and find out their own opinions and everything. But yeah, each character I feel had such well-rounded and different personalities. Did you have a particular favourite to write?
Me, I loved writing them all. I loved them. They're like my little fictional family, and I welcomed every one of them onto the page, and I blessed them, and I kissed their heads, and I set them about their tasks. Probably the character I love writing the most was Raven, because I found him just like channeling some divine, naughty, scandalous energy, and probably my inner self, actually. Like, keep under control all the time. No, but I had lots of fun and tears with writing them all, but Raven was my
yeah. I love Raven. He's just such a character from the get-go, and I feel like it's so interesting writing someone something that is so timeless, and the language used, and just really very, very whimsical, very lovely. And
thank you.
It filled the gap between the two places, shall we say, very nicely. Yeah, exactly.
He's not confined by human dialogue.
No.
He is both before and after. He's in and out. He's during and happening, and still he's just a bit of everything. And so he could say anything he liked, really.
Absolutely. I think my favourite part with him is talking to the other birds and seeing how different they were compared to him.
I had so much fun writing that, and I was inspired to write that because I was walking in England when I was there, and I saw a jackdaw sitting on a road sign, and its head was sort of turned, and I thought, oh, hello, nothing wrong with you. and it was just absolute joy to write that thing.
It was so fun. I think seeing him go from being with Richard to the modern day was so interesting to see that he was just the same guy. He's just the same guy. Kind of slots in wherever he needs to. I love it. How would you say that your background in poetry influenced the book? Because it was genuinely so beautifully written and so beautifully crafted. And I feel like the change in perspectives within the formatting and the editing of the book was such a joy to read, because you knew where you were and when you were. How did that?
I had a great editor helping me with that. I did get a bit lost in my point of view changes sometimes. So shout out to Scott. Thank you, Scott. I think as a poet, I really love to make my work rhythmical. It's really important for me when I'm writing a longer form and I'm writing a novel. I like to make my sentences thin. I like every word to be working really hard to make sense in the story sense, but also to be suggesting a little bit of something else underneath. That, the old desire and need for subtext as a poet. So when you write a poem, you're really concentrating on what you're not writing rather than what you are writing. When you're writing prose, it's different because you've got to do that at the same time as put enough in to make sense, get everybody onto the next bit. So I think I have a really strong beat in my head when I write. And that's what I hope comes out when you read it, that it has a rhythm and a way of saying something. I've tried to make every single word do a good job on the page. And also, when you say it's very easy to read, my subheadings are a direct result of writing poetry, because I often will write a title and then something underneath it. So I thought, when I realised I could do that in a book, it was like a freedom. It was just like, oh, I can do that. And it makes So I thought that was a nice way to have instead of a chapter heading, it was sort of part of what you were reading, but set aside in a way that they became little signposts for what was going on as well.
Amazing. I love that. And then what was your writing process like? Do you tend to write chronologically after researching, or do you kind of dip into where you need to at that point in time?
I was writing scenes. I don't tend, I write chronologically in various bits of the book when you've got to stitch it together. But generally, I will write a scene, and I'll often start at the beginning, do something, a scene that might shift up. So I'm not a meticulous kind of planner. I'm more of a feeler,
Yeah,
but with some planning.
amazing. I feel like as long as you've got your solid research and you've got the backstories crafted and everything, I feel like that really shows how much work was put into it when you are reading it. Yeah. What was your favorite part to write?
Sorry.
What was your favorite part?
My favorite part. Oh,
to write it.
Okay, I think you know where Molly discovers Deedless in the cellar. That was a really, really early scene, and I'd written a form of Molly going down into the cellar and discovering somebody who was dark and dangerous and mad, and him sort of taking off his clothes. I was going, oh, that was a really good scene. I really like that. So I think when I finally got it all together and put Molly down where she could see him for the first time, the two worlds finally meeting, all the noises in the house making sense, and Deedless actually being a human from the 21st century after Edward Faraday. I think that's my favourite bit, when he's looking up and she's holding her phone on him, and he's being blinded, but she just can't stop looking at him.
Yeah, amazing. I feel like that whole the scene, but also him, like you said earlier, coming to terms with the modern world and getting to know the modern world was so fascinating to read, because obviously they're not going to know anything. Obviously he's going to be so overwhelmed. I think what was so powerful was that in those early scenes you don't hear him speak, or you don't see him speak, and still coming to terms with how his previous experience has been awakening. I don't want to say too much because I want people to read it themselves, but it was very, very beautiful to read.
Oh, thank you. In my early days, when I was really getting the sort of main working draft done, part of my writing process to try to get my head into the 15th century was I wrote by candlelight, and it gives a really different light and it's really quiet. And I think that was a way that I could get into a slightly different time, if you ever really think that somebody in this world who can switch on a plug, with a flick of the finger, can actually transport themselves back into the 15th century. I gave it a shot though.
Yeah, it sounds great. I think that's a great idea. I think it's just like the little things that you need, isn't it? It can only take something. It could be something small that really does just transport you back to some place. Yeah, beautiful. And then with the magical realism threaded throughout the book, and even with that, how incredibly real the relationships felt, and stepping in and feeling like you were in the room with them and seeing everything happen and getting to see the different perspectives, and how they all felt about each other. Was human nature and the nature of their relationships, how important was that when crafting?
Really, really important, Lee, because I had to keep everything real. So even though there were magical elements, that the everyone meeting in the Chamber of Stars, and the king wearing his cloak of feathers, I felt like they were all people in the end. They were all people who were lost and found and having to find themselves again. And that was what really helped me nail everything down. I thought, oh, my little family members. I love keeping it real.
Yeah. Amazing.
If that makes sense. I feel like it was really important for me for it not to be a fantasy la la land thing, but they're real people, whether they're dead or alive, whether they're a bird or a human, dealing with real emotions as to why they're all in this situation. And emotions are difficult, and everybody's got secrets, and everybody needs forgiveness. And I think that's really where I was getting to at the end. And I think those are really real emotions, and that's what anchored everything.
Yeah, definitely. I think it all culminates in this beautiful cacophony of human life and relationships, and how life goes on after. I mean, a big part of the book is the dealing of like with grief,
Yeah.
but also in such a beautiful way. It's
Oh,
not wham bam grief. It is how each individual person deals with that on a daily basis, and I think that was really stunning to read.
oh, thank you. Well, I think grief is a very personal thing. Everybody suffers from grief, whoever and whatever they're grieving. And I think, Richard's grieving his life. Everybody in the book is grieving in some way. Doesn't mean they're not great or fun to be around, but it just means that grief is it's not a linear process. It's very up and down and roller coaster and individualistic. So
Yeah,
I hope that's what I achieved with that.
100%, 100%. And then finally, time has completely flown. Is there anything that you would like to ask your readers ahead of the release?
Oh, almost didn't even understand what that was. I always ask people, well, I'm sort of thanking people for having the time and the effort and the desire to go on a journey. I think if you've got a book, you're going on a journey, and I really hope that everyone who picks up the Oxenbridge King loves the journey. That's really
Beautiful.
what I want to say. Love the journey, I hope.
I think that's
love the journey.
Yes, I think that's such a lovely message to leave it on. And thank you so much, Chrissy, for joining me. It's been so lovely to chat to you. And very excited, very, very excited for everybody to be able to get their hands on a copy and read your beautiful work. And
thank you.
Yeah, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening.
I shall have a glass of wine.
Oh, lovely. What colour?
I think we'll go for white. Will you join me?
Yes, of course I will. It's 5 o'clock somewhere.
1 o'clock. Okay. All right, I'll pour you one.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for talking to me.
Of course, and thank you so much for being here, and best of luck with the release.
Thank you so much.